Shalom, this is Levi Shore. Welcome back to Swing Torah. We're going to do Parsha Shelach Lecha, Send for Yourself. It's an amazing Parsha, and it's very interesting. We're going to see the greatness of Eretz Yisrael, what the spies got wrong, how they give this false report of Lashon Hara about the land of Israel, and how Kalev and Yeshua ben Nun, how they stood up to the spies, and the great tragedy of how the Jewish people listened to this false report from the spies, and how Tisha B'Av, which should have been this great celebration, the day that as the Jewish people as a nation for the first time entered Eretz Yisrael, entered the land of Israel, should be the greatest celebration in the year, and it became this day of mourning. And on this day of Tisha B'Av, we saw the destruction of the first temple and the second temple and the exiles of the spies. The exile of the 10 tribes. But we're going to see in the future when Mashiach comes. And it's interesting, the Gemara says that Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av. There's going to be some spirit, some ruach of Mashiach that's going to awaken the Jewish people to see the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. And maybe Tisha B'Av in the future we're going to see a great celebration. All right, so let's start off here with a mashal. Let's start off with a little story. So there's a king, and his son finally grew old enough that it was time for the son to be married. It was time for the prince to be married. So the king, he searched all throughout the world, and he found the perfect young lady for his son to marry. She would make a great queen in the future. She would make a great princess. And he saw all the great qualities in her. She was beautiful. She was intelligent. She had great midos. Her personal characteristics were refined, and she was of royal lineage. And this is the perfect woman to marry his son. And the son told the father, he said, "Let me meet him. Let me meet her." And the king, he was very disappointed. And the king says, "My son doesn't trust me. My son doesn't believe that I spent all this effort to find him the perfect princess." And the father says, "Well, I must let him meet the woman, or he'll see that he will never understand that how refined she is in her midos and her personal characteristics, how beautiful she is, how intelligent she is, how I picked the perfect woman for him. He'll never understand, but I will not let him marry her. I will let his son marry her." So what's the nimshal to the mashal? What's the key to the parable? So what it means is, who's the king? The king's Hashem. And who's the princess? The princess is the land of Israel. And who's the prince? The prince is the Nesiim, the princes of all the tribes, the 10 Nesiim that were led astray by their own gaiva, by their own arrogance, and they gave a false report against the princess, who's the land of Israel. Now it's the perfect match for the Jewish people to live in the land of Israel, and we'll talk about the greatness of the land of Israel. And then what does it mean that the son would be allowed to marry the princess? That not that generation, not the Dor Dea, not the generation of wisdom and knowledge that came out of Egypt with Moshe Rabbeinu, with Moses, but their children. Their children would be led into the land by Yeshua ben Nun, by Joshua, who was one of the spies. And then a greater question is, in this time of darkness, how do we know the truth? How about when the majority of people see the world wrong? They don't see it clearly. How do we get to the truth? How do we stand up for the truth like Kalev ben Yefuna did? How does he stand up against the 10 spies who give a false report of the greatness of Eretz Yisrael? How do we know what's the truth in this time of darkness? And then what about the majority? What if the majority of the Jewish people are led astray and wrong? Then how do we stand up for the truth? So we're going to learn some fascinating things in this week's Parsha. All right, so we'll start off. We're going to get some help today from the Midrash says, Love This Sefer by Rabbi Moshe Weissman. And the spies left on the 29th of Sivan. And they toured around Eretz Yisrael for 40 days. So first they started in the south, and then I believe they went to the west, and they went up the beautiful coastline on the Mediterranean Sea, and they got up to the north. They got up to Carmel, or Haifa is the Mount Carmel, and then they went across the top, the beautiful Golan Heights, and they came back down. So they were there for 40 days, and they came back on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, and they give this horrible report about the land of Israel. So what happened? So they return on the 40th day, on the evening of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And before entering their tents, they approached the base of Midrash. They approached the Shiva where everyone was learning Torah. They found Moshe, Aaron, and the Sanhedrin, and the people studying the halachos of Chala and Orla. So they were studying the halacha of what we would need to do when we enter the land of Israel. So they're already excited about the mitzvos that we could do in the land of Israel. And the spy said, "You needn't study those halacha." which apply only to Eretz Yisrael, only to the land of Israel. And they told the people mockingly, you will never be able to put them into practice. So the spies delivered their carefully prepared speech. First, they related the praises of Eretz Yisrael. They knew that their slanderous statements would only be accepted if they began by telling the truth. And this is something fascinating. A sheker, a lie, cannot stand unless it has a little bit of truth in it. And the most manipulative of politicians, you'll see that they'll put a little bit of truth into their statements and then they'll bring the lie out in the back. And no one can tell a lie that will be accepted unless there's a little bit of truth in there. So they praised Eretz Yisrael, that it was a land flowing with milk and honey. So what it means like the cows and the goats, and they'd be so abundant with the milk would just flow out of them. There'll be rivers, streams of flowing milk all over the land. It's poetic, but it just shows the abundance of the milk that comes from the cows and the goats and the lamb. And the honey is from the date palm. The dates that grow in the date palm, they're so flavorful that they have the sap that comes out of the dates, and it just flows into this date honey. This is rivers of date honey. So it's just poetic, famous, poetic statement that the Torah says about the land flowing with milk and honey. And the trees are just covered with sweet, juicy dates dripping with honey. And the goats have so much milk that they have it's overflowing with milk. Their surplus just falls out into the ground. And we saw actual brooks, actual streams composed of milk and honey. And remember, these are the spies that want to give a false report to the Jewish people. These are the spies that want to get us not to come in the land of Israel, and they still cannot help but admit how amazing is the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. Now look at the succulent fruit which we have brought. So let's examine the fruits closely. Did you ever see such gigantic grapes? Aren't they strange? Well, this country houses monstrous inhabitants, just as it produces monstrous fruits. It cannot be conquered because its dwellers are strong and their cities are well fortified. We cannot enter from any direction without encountering frightful enemies. And in the south lives Amalek. At the mere mention of the name Amalek, the people trembled. So who is Amalek? So we've seen Amalek most recently, unfortunately, in the 20th century. And Amalek is the Nazis, Yamach Shemo. And they've shown the world their symbol, their swastika. And the Nazis still brings fear into the Jewish people. Amalek brings fear in the Jewish people, and they oppose us. They are the nation that has opposed us for thousands of years, and they are our enemies. They are the nation that tries to keep Hashem and the knowledge of Hashem and the knowledge of Torah mitzvahs out of the world, where it's our goal to fight against them and bring the knowledge of Hashem and His Torah and His mitzvahs into the world so all know it, so that we can be a Or LaGoyim, we can be a light to all the nations. So the spies mention Amalek first, even though the Canaanim and the Amorim were stronger than Amalek. They had more powerful armies because they knew how much fear the name instilled in the people. And the spies continued. They said the Canaanim dwell in the east and the west, and the Amorim and their relatives, and also are mighty warriors in the mountains in the north. And all the borders surrounded by mighty nations. So far the spies told no lies. The Canaanim cities were indeed very, very well fortified, and their inhabitants truly mighty. It was also true that there were giants among them. However, the spies' suggestion that the land was unconquerable did not constitute a factual report, but rather personal opinion. They had not been asked to take a stand on whether the land was invincible or not. If they did wish to state their views, should have mentioned them to Moshe in private. So upon listening to the description of the invincible enemy armies, the people began to lose courage, and Yeshua stood up to contradict the spies' words. But the spies knew that Yeshua ben Nun, he was the top student of Moshe Rabbeinu. Joshua was Moses' top student, and they know that Joshua was going to give a good report, on the land. So they didn't let Yeshua even talk. The spies would not even let him voice his opinion. They said, "Quiet," they shouted. "You have no right to speak. You have daughters, but no sons. You do not have to fear that your sons will be recruited for the army. We don't want our sons to be killed." So Kalev realized that he had to resort to a different method. And he stood up on a bench and he screamed provocatively. He says, "Has Ben Amram only perpetrated this action upon us?" So it's interesting. So Kalev calls Moshe Rabbeinu. He calls Moses Ben Amram. Moshe's father was Amram. And it's a very disparaging way to talk about someone. You don't even say their name. You just call them by the name of their father. And Amram was a great tzaddik. He was the Gadol Ador. He was the leader of the generation before Moshe became the leader. but he wanted to trick the spies into thinking that he was with them. So it's interesting. The spies were tricky because they start with the truth and then they bring their lies. But Kalev, who wanted to speak the truth, it's interesting. So when dealing with wicked people, he starts with a lie, speaking disparagingly against Moshe, calling him Ben Amram, to trick them into letting him speak. So sometimes when we deal with wicked people, to get the truth out, it's an interesting lesson here. Sometimes we have to trick them what we're going to say to get the truth out into the world. So expecting that Kalev would support them, the spies hushed the crowd. The raised voices died down, and everyone waited expectantly for the next piece of the sensational, story of what was to come. So when he had everyone's attention, so it's going to fascinate. So how do we fight? How do we know the truth in the times of darkness? Let's look into the Chumash, what Kalev actually says. So Kalev actually says something very simple. He says, Alo na'aleh, rising, ascending, we will ascend. V'yarashnu osa, ki yachol nuchala, and we will inherit it, we will conquer it, because we are able to do it. We are able to do it. So we're gonna talk about what Kalev is. A very simple statement, but what an amazing idea Kalev has, and how that fights against the lies and the lashon hara of the spies. So Kalev says, he starts by saying, what has Ben Amram done for us? And then he says, Moshe has done much more than just this, just to send the spies into the land. Was it not the merit and the great zechus of Moshe Rabbeinu that Hashem caused the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, to be split, the great miracle of splitting the Red Sea for us? Wasn't that also an action of Moshe Rabbeinu? In Moshe's merit, did Hashem not give us the man? In Moshe's merit, did Hashem not cause the slav, the birds to fall so we could have plenty of meat to eat? Why are you afraid of conquering Eretz Canaan? If Moshe commands, Moshe has never misled us. If he says, though, we can prevail over our enemies. Even if the land was situated in the very heavens, in Shemayim, Moshe would say to us, construct ladders and climb there. We should follow him. Our success lies in obeying him, because whatever Moshe says is Hashem's will. When the spies heard Kalev's word, they immediately contradicted him. They said, it is not as you say. We cannot prevail over these people, for they are stronger than we are. When the giants came against us, we pronounced Hashem's 12-letter name that Moshe taught us, but it was ineffective. Even the master of the universe himself, the Rabbono Shel Olam, cannot expel the inhabitants from the land. And in order to prevent the people from listening to Kalev, the spies proceeded to speak lashon hara about the land. It's a land that devours its inhabitants, chas v'shalom. It's full of plague. Now, why do they say it was full of plague? So Hashem caused Eov, the Tzaddik. He caused Job, famous from the book of Eov, Sefer Eov, the book of Job. He caused Eov to pass away right before the spies came into land. So the whole country was in mourning. And while they were mourning the righteous Eov, the Canaanim didn't notice the Jewish spies. So Hashem purposely does this great thing for them, and that he perfectly times that when it will be time for Eov to be nifter is exactly when the Jewish people arrive in the land, so that the spies, would not be caught and captured. But they turn it around, and they turn around and say, oh, it's a land of plague. Whenever we pass, we notice people dying. Since the inhabitants are tremendously strong, they were not dying from any physical weakness. Rather, the land's harmful climate destroys everyone who dwells there. And do you know what kind of giants we encountered? They're the remnants of the generation of Enosh. So tall that their heads seem to touch the sun. Whoever meets them becomes so panic-stricken that he collapses in fright. So these were some of the lies that they told about the land of Israel. So how were we so fooled? How are we so tricked by these 10 spies that we cried all night at that Tisha B'Av? And Hashem says, you cry for nothing. You cry for nothing? I'll give you something to cry about. And unfortunately, Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, has become a day of mourning, where the first base of Mikdash, the first temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians. And the second base of Mikdash, the second temple, was destroyed by the Romans, all on Tisha B'Av. And the 10 tribes were exiled on Tisha B'Av. And I think eventually even the tribes of Yehuda and Benjamin were finally exiled on Tisha B'Av. So it's become not the great day of celebration like it was supposed to be, but a day of mourning. So what is this? How do we see the truth in this darkness when even the majority accepts the lies? And the difference of perception is, do you see the world just by its physical nature, or do you see the higher spiritual level that underlies it all? Because there's people in the world, Amalek tells the world, we're atheists, we don't believe in Hashem, we don't accept Hashem, this all randomly all just happened. Oh, a big bang, it just randomly happened, stardust just randomly formed itself into planets and suns. Or the truth is that this infinite powerful being, this infinite being, Hashem, he created suns. He created the planets. He created solar systems and galaxies. Imagine the power of that. It didn't randomly happen. Everything was planned, and the Torah is the blueprint. Do we see just the physical? Do we believe this lie that everything randomly came together? We see the complexity of a human being. We see the complexity of how many animals and plant life and fruits and vegetables grow in this world, the beautiful sunsets and sunrises. We see the beautiful world that was created for us. Do we believe the lies? Or do we see the higher spiritual truth of the world? We see there's an infinite being that created it all. So what Kalev was saying is, nothing can defeat us. They were scared. Okay, there's 7 powerful Canaanite nations. So there's Amalek. So there's 31 powerful Canaanite kings in the land of Israel. Are they more powerful than this infinite being? Are they more powerful than Hashem, who brought us out of Egypt? The most powerful empire back then. The Egyptian empire, the sorcerers of Mitzrayim. Hashem was more powerful than them. He brought them to their knees. He brought them to their knees with the 10 plagues. This miraculous parting of the Red Sea. And the Midrash says it was parted into 12 different parts, with each tribe goes through in one different part. The miracles of the splitting of the Yam Suf. But then the land itself, the greatness of Eretz Yisrael, renowned for its 7 species. And when the Beis HaMikdash stood, all throughout the world knew that the best wheat, the best barley in the world came from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel. The pomegranates, the grapes, the olives, the figs, the dates, the 7 beautiful species. The grapes of Israel were renowned around the world. The best wine was from Eretz Yisrael. And we see now, Baruch Hashem, Israeli wine is starting to come up in international competitions. But what will it be when Mashiach comes, when we have a Beis HaMikdash again, when the Kedusha? But what makes Eretz Yisrael so holy? Eretz Yisrael is where Gan Eden was. It's where the Garden of Eden was. The Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, stood on that very spot, the Even Shtia, the stone of foundation, where the Aron HaKodesh, where the Ark of the Covenant sat, where the Luchos, the sapphire tablets that Hashem engraved with the 10 Commandments were in, both the broken first set and the whole second set, and then the Sefer Torah written by Moshe was put, next to the Aron HaKodesh, attached to it. But it's the place where Hashem created everything, and Hashem sends the Or HaEin Sof into the world, and it comes into that point. It touches where the Shemayim touches the Aretz, where the heavens touch the earth is that point where the Eitz Chaim stood, where the tree of life stood, where the Kodesh HaGadoshim, the Holy of the Holies in the Beis HaMikdash, and the temple was, where the Aron HaKodesh sat, where the Shekhinah of Hashem rested on top of. That's where the Kav touches. That's where the heavens touch the earth, and that Kedusha spreads out from the Har HaBayis, from the Temple Mount, to all the land of Israel. It's a land where we can be closer to Hashem, we can connect closer, where one day, B'ezrat Hashem, when Mashiach comes, we will live and see the rebuilding of the 3rd temple, and we will see the presence, the Shekhinah of Hashem, we will see Hashem himself. We'll see a manifestation of this infinite being. And that's the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. We can be led astray like the spies with our own gaiva, with our own biases, our own arrogance, where we are greater, and we don't admit that the greatness of Hashem, that we make ourselves into gods because of our arrogance, and that leads us astray. And that's what happened to the spies. The spies were worried that they wouldn't be princes anymore when they went into the land of Israel. Maybe they wouldn't have such a position of greatness. They would rather not go into the land of Israel and maintain their great position. I mean, how many Jews in America may have great positions of power? They may be senators, congressmen, judges, who knows? Maybe what will they be when Mashiach comes? Maybe not so great. And the arrogance can trick us all to believe a lie over the truth. But what did Kalev do that he could see the truth clearly? First, he attached himself to the Avos, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And who were they? Abraham was the embodiment of chesed, of kindness. And Yitzhak was the embodiment of Gevurah, of strength, of self-control. And Yaakov was the perfect balance. Jacob was the perfect balance in them both, of Tiferes, of truth. Tiferes is beauty and truth. When you balance the kindness and the Gevurah, when you balance kindness, doing kindness for others, and self-control, you get to truth. And Kalev attached himself to that. And he saw that when Hashem is with us, nothing can stop us. And the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. So B'ezrat Hashem, in this time of darkness, where people see the world so differently, and there's all the liars of the world, their lashon hara, is saying that there is no Hashem, and the Torah is some ancient, thing. The Torah is the blueprint of the world. Hashem is the most powerful, infinite being, the only one there is, the one that runs it all. May we see the truth in this time of darkness, and may we soon be able to return, all of us, gathering all of us, and see a melech, a king in Eretz Yisrael. And we all see the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, and we all get our own portion. Each family gets their own portion in Eretz Yisrael. And may it come quickly in our days. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you back again soon on Sweet Good Torah.